Hello YouTube and welcome back to World of Warships with Wadres, and today's video is going to be talking about the Tier 4 British aircraft carrier, the HMS Hermes. And I have just recently accessed this ship courtesy of the Fly Strike Win event and a relatively good handful of the air raid containers. Now, one thing that I will say is that this ship definitely still kind of lives up to the whole thing with the Tier 4, basically your entry-level aircraft carriers, being kind of difficult to work with regarding just getting the hang of aircraft carriers in the first place. But with that being in mind, I'm also going to go ahead and say that considering the work that I have done so far with the aircraft carriers post-rework, this has actually been an easier experience than either of the other two aircraft carrier branches. Mainly because, at least for the Teir, while the attack squadrons, the attack rockets, the dive bombers, aren't quite so, dare I say, effective, the one thing I have noted is that their aiming time for the torpedoes, or even just in general, is just easier to work with overall. So one of the things that I'm actually thinking of regarding the British aircraft carrier line in general is just that it's going to be a very good line of ships just for players who are trying to get the hang of the new aircraft carrier mechanics without working with either of the currently established lines. And part of why I think this is a big deal is because the US and Japanese aircraft carriers were designed and introduced with the original RTS game style in mind, whereas the British, their entire development process has been during the not during the RTS, has been during the rework and all of that. So not only was this carrier basically, or these carriers basically designed for the rework itself, they've been, well, they are, the only way I can say it properly is they are children of the rework. They are meant for the rework and the way it's designed. These aren't like the other ships where they're still trying to balance them after the transition. No, these ships have been designed and balanced in-game, in the rework already, because this is where they were, this is the element they were designed for. So, I think they might actually stand a decent chance of shining where the American and Japanese aircraft carriers are still kinda hurting, dare I say. Now, that is not the only thing that sets the British aircraft carriers apart, mind you. I am noticing that the dive bombers are a little bit easier to work with, mainly because you aren't having to put up quite so much with them going into a steep climb followed by a dive, which severely affects your indication of lead when you're getting ready to dive bomb a target. Instead, they're pretty much of a straight-in shot on the target, which just makes it easier when you're trying to anticipate your lead and everything. And the simple fact that they keep going in a straight line also means that you can get a better grasp of what your target is doing instead of having your camera perspective just completely change on you as you enter your attack run. Throw in the short arming time and aiming time of the torpedo bombers especially, and these ships are actually very capable of being quite lethal in at least short time periods of engagements. So that's something else to kind of keep in mind. Now, one thing that I do have to make note of here is that given that this is Tier 4, you only really get one torpedo per drop, so this is a rather hefty limitation. But these are nice fast torps, and they are very difficult for enemy ships to dodge. So as long as you aim them right, as long as you get in there properly, you can actually do a significant amount of damage. The only thing being that the individual torps are not that great at dealing damage, really. I mean, I don't think I've had a single torpedo hit that landed more than 5,000 damage at a shot. And the torpedoes are something that I'm actually going to be coming back to quite frequently, mainly because they're kind of what I've gotten the most success with so far, because honestly, I'm finding that trying to deal with anti-air with rocket planes and dive bombers, kind of tricky. They have to fly in, I mean, at least the torpedo bombers, they dive down when they start getting close, and they do a good job, at least while they're approaching target, of avoiding anti-air batteries, anti-air fire. But the attack planes, the dive bombers, they're not doing so hot. They tend, for whatever reason, to just take an incredible amount of damage from anti-air batteries, and I'm not having an incredible amount of luck actually mitigating a lot of that damage. So, yeah, the only thing I'm really finding I'm getting a consistent amount of damage from is actually from torpedo runs, as opposed to rocket attacks or bombing runs. Which, again, comes back to everything with the damage output and whatnot on the torpedoes. Especially considering when things start actually getting tight with these ships, it does kind of start being a little bit of a problem when you can't put out the damage that you need to in as short a period of time as you need to. So I am really kind of hoping that these torpedoes do get buffed a little bit, especially since these are still work-in-progress ships. The only other thing that I can consider regarding helping these aircraft carriers out a little bit is just improving the damage output of the dive bombs or the rocket attacks. Maybe even find a way for it to be scaled against targets like the battleships as opposed to cruisers or destroyers, just to make them hurt the heavier targets a little bit more. I don't know, that's just my 2 cents on it. It just seems like they're terribly inconsistent, as opposed to the torpedoes, which, as long as you aim them accurately, you can get constant, consistent damage on target regardless of maneuvering of your target. Whereas the bombs, you can drop 10, 15, 20 bombs and only land one for a couple hundred damage. Whereas a torpedo, every hit is like 4,000 or 5,000 damage. So it's just one of those things where if you have a good lined-up run where you drop your bombs and get 2,000-3,000 damage when you can get 5,000 damage in a torpedo, it really kind of feels lackluster. I mean, granted, torpedoes have always basically been the bread and butter of aircraft carriers from the beginning of the game. But yeah, that's just kind of my viewpoint on it. And this match is kind of a case in point. I mean, I got 5 torpedo hits on target. Granted, this was only my second run in the Hermes, but I was already doing substantially better than my first run. 36,000 damage done, 26,000 credits earned, 5 torpedo hits. I did land 38 bomb hits, despite my arguments of inconsistency and lack of hits. But when you consider that that was probably like 40-50% misses on the bombs at best, it really just seems... I don't know where my thoughts going on with that. I hope you all can figure it out better than I can. The other thing, though, is that the rocket planes, with some of the detectability changes with destroyers and other ships and whatnot, it just kind of seems like the rockets really underperform now. just because you have so much invested in trying to just even detect your targets in some cases, that by the time you have them detected, once you actually get rockets on target, you're having to maneuver too much where you're not really capable of actually delivering accurate strikes on low detectability targets, which is, when you're talking about destroyers, kind of what aircraft carriers are supposed to be countering for the most part anyway. So, yeah, it's, yeah. And that does not only apply to the British aircraft carriers either. This is kind of a broad spectrum commentary and application on the US and Japanese aircraft carriers as well, as I've noticed. It just seems like the rockets really have just kind of become worthless, even in co-op matches, unless you're attacking the heavier targets. So, yeah. Kind of starting to get a little annoyed with the direction Wargaming is taking their development and nerfing, buffing, or just overall adjustment and balancing of the aircraft carriers. The aircraft carriers are just kind of being nerfed into oblivion lately, and the buffs that have been put to them really aren't that great. Now, at this point, I will take a moment to apologize in the appearance difference between the previous match and the match you're currently watching. The first match was actually recorded from a battle replay because I was not actually intending on doing a video at that particular point in time, and I just decided that that would be a match worth at least showcasing. Whereas the match you are actually watching was recorded in match, which is why you're actually getting a better look at what my indicators are doing, where my indicators are, and so on and so forth, so that you can actually see where my aim actually is and what my aim is doing. So, basically the difference between recording a live match versus recording from a replay. That's, well, yeah. Enough said. The other thing is, this match here is going to differ substantially from the previous one because, one, this is all equal tier. This is purely tier 4s. I'm not being up-tiered or down-tiered, which has a dramatic effect on your gameplay, as anybody knows. On top of the fact that the vast majority of the friendly team are bots. So, I'm, aside from one other, I think he's in the, he's in our Phoenix, is, everybody else is bots, so they're, basically just going to be the, YOLO variant, where they are basically virtually worthless in the long run. So, this match is actually going to be rather standout in regards to the damage, at least for a Tier 4 co-op match, as opposed to the match you were seeing a little bit earlier. This match is also going to be a phenomenal showcase of just how much I actually end up relying on the torpedo bombers for basically doing anything. I mean, the previous match, if you were paying attention when I was going over the detailed screens, the previous match I did like 700 damage with rockets, 7,000 damage with bombs, and everything else was torpedoes. By comparison, the torpedo damage, bomb damage, and rocket damage for this match here is going to be shockingly disparate by comparison. Just the sheer amount of torpedo damage that I end up doing is phenomenal for a Tier 4 match, and I firmly believe that it shows exactly how strong the torpedoes are relative to the others, and why I think the rockets and bombs could actually use to be buffed, for lack of a better term. And another part of why I'm saying all of that is because aircraft carriers aren't like a lot of the surface ships, and this is something that has been a standout factor of them pretty much from inception, and this is also referring to their real-world applications as opposed to just the game applications. They are relying on damage from their squadron output as opposed to ships that are capable of putting out salvos of like 500 damage every few seconds, or even say upwards of 12,000 damage in a good hitting salvo from battleships. Aircraft carriers don't have that capacity. They don't have that raw damage potential that a lot of the surface ships have. And this is something that actually goes back to issues that they've had with their economy in the past. Kind of why I'm actually enjoying the fact that they have battleship economy, at least for right now, although I haven't seen that too effectively, to be perfectly honest. But it's also the simple fact that their damage output is so reliant on their aircraft getting to target in the first place that when you only have a rocket strike that gets through for 500 damage, or a torpedo that completely misses, this isn't like when you're in a surface ship, where when you're firing 10, 12 shells and land one hit for 1,000 damage every, say, 20, 30 seconds, and we're looking at that on the outside for a battleship. Lord knows the DPS of cruisers and destroyers is substantially better. Yeah, it's just aircraft carriers, at least in the new reworked editions, they're just their damage output, their DPS, it sucks. It's crap. I've even had more than a couple of discussions with a couple of my clanmates where the vast majority of co-op matches, yes, co-op matches that have been lost for most of them, including myself, in the last month or so, have primarily been because of aircraft carrier matches. And that also goes to the fact that in co-op matches, the aircraft carriers on or what would be the aircraft carrier on the bot team, is being replaced with an equal tier battleship, which I've already gone over that, and there is absolutely no balance or equivalence there. But this is also the simple fact that you have aircraft carriers who, despite it being a month out from the rework having gone live, are still trying to figure out how to work their aircraft, how to work their ships, in an ever-changing aircraft carrier environment where it seems like every hotfix that comes through, all that's happening to those ships is that they're being nerfed more and more and more, making them even harder to manage. So, yeah, it's really just some of the things that are being done with the aircraft carriers. They're getting outrageously difficult to work with, if I dare say so. This is part of why I think, from a rework standpoint, meaning post-rework ships, why I think I'm actually going to enjoy the Royal Navy aircraft carriers far more than I will the Japanese or the American aircraft carriers. And again, it's primarily because the Royal Navy aircraft carriers were designed for the rework, with the rework in mind. They were not re-engineered from scratch from a completely different playstyle. But also the simple fact that the way their aircraft work, the way they work in general, is just so much more effective and so much more efficient in the rework style that they just make sense. They work. They do better because they aren't they're being brought up to the level they need to be by the designs, as opposed to trying to be still re-engineered from the ground up. And they're just easier to work with overall from their aiming standpoint and everything else.
We destroyed an enemy
Anyway,
battleship.
my long rant on all of that, I suppose, is done and over with. Second match, 60,000 damage done, as opposed to the previous match. 48,000 credits earned, 510 experience points, and 32 free experience points. Definitely substantially better results, but also look at what I was having to deal with. I basically had the entire last couple of ships on the enemy team charging with me, and I was really the only ship in any position to actually do anything about them. 10 torpedo hits, 19 bomb hits, so kind of lackluster by comparison to my bomb accuracy in the previous, but as opposed to the previous match, I also got 8 rocket hits as opposed to 3. So, dramatic improvement there. 2 ship kills, overall nothing egregiously bad. I was at the top of the team with 300 base experience points earned for the match, which is, again, phenomenal for only having my third match in this ship. But yeah, here's what I'm talking about. 3,000 damage done total for the bombs and for the rockets. 3,000 damage each. Whereas the torpedoes, I was relying on those so heavily and did almost 40,000 damage with them. So yeah, very, very consistent damage output. And anyway, net earnings, 38,000 credits for the match and 550 commander experience points. Anyway, I suppose I will let you all go and let you all decide for yourselves what you think of these new aircraft carriers. And as I unlock the Tier 6 and the Tier 8, I can guarantee you I will get my impressions out on them as quickly as I possibly can. On that note, I hope I catch you all again next time, and I wish you all happy hunting out there. Stay safe, people. Have a good one.